I'm looking at Ben Thomas. I bet that's what you get up to of a Sunday.
Yeah, it might be a stretch goal. Might need another pandemic for me to get into it.
Okay. Ben Thomas is with us, as is Dale Husband. Kia ora korua. Welcome, Dale.
Thanks. Hey, kia ora to you, Catherine. Ngā ki ngā kai whakarongo, and tēnā koe to you as well, Ben.
Morena.
Dale is long-time broadcaster and Radio Waatea presenter, hosting a current affairs program. Ben Thomas is a former National Government Press Secretary, a columnist and a director of the public affairs firm Capital. The charm offensive is on. It was at home and now it's away. The Prime Minister is in India. Under pressure at home, we have to say, last week from polls and criticisms and critiques. But a win this morning in being able to start this India free trade tour with an announcement of what? Talks about talks, or talks actually getting underway, Ben?
It seems like talks getting underway. I mean, obviously these things start at a very kind of zero level. You know, you start right from the beginning with, I think Todd McClay said, some boundary issues sort of sorted out in advance because there are certainly sticking points where we could really get mired and progress could halt, you know, particularly around agriculture. So sounds like there is the hint of progress. You know, the light ahead is the starting line, and that is still further ahead than we were this time last week. So, you know, an immediate win of sorts for the government.
It's the kind of thing he needs to change the narrative to, isn't it? Because he keeps promising to be the CEO style, let's chunk it down, let's get it done, you know, and this is an actual solid step he can point to.
Yeah, that's right. And of course, you know, the
nascent as it is.
the possibly ill-advised promise to deliver a free trade agreement in the first term.
That was during the election campaign, was it not?
Yeah, during the election campaign, where you know, things got a little bit heated. But you know, in trying to get some sort of daylight, I guess, between the two major parties and their leaders in terms of policy. But look, you know, to his credit, he's certainly working hard on it, and he's got his team working hard on it. I think Luke Malpass in the Post really described it as a full court press from New Zealand Inc. over there. And, you know, we've got, you know, Ross Taylor there in the business delegation. You know, they've really lined up, you know, a lot of senior ministers, a lot of senior business leaders. You know, they are giving it, you know, a really good shot.
This comes at a time, Dale, where there's concerns about our traditional largest trading partners, two of the big three anyway, being the United States and being China. So even getting to the point of being able to say, look, we've got a toenail in the door, is that important for the Prime Minister in particular?
Well, one thing about Christopher Luxon, he's always constantly upbeat, and I respect that. With India, of course, I don't know what we're going to trade with them. They're the largest dairy producer in the world, aren't they? And, you know, this is our main export item. Didn't Meka Whaitiri make some inroads there briefly when she was a minister as well in the last government? But, look, free trade agreements with India, show me the money. And same with last week's investment summit. It's one thing to talk about it and say, hey, look, we're here and willing to do business, but at this stage, nobody's been able to point to any concrete gains. Making inroads to India, I guess, makes some sense. I see that Indians now, Catherine, are the third biggest population group in New Zealand, with a growth of, is it 22% since 2018? There's about 300,000 Indian people who call New Zealand home, so perhaps it does provide some sort of bargaining chip to these delegations, and taking Ross Taylor and high-profile ex-cricketers, I suppose, just adds a bit of spark to what's a difficult challenge to get across the line, but you've got to start somewhere, and good luck to them.
The appearance of momentum, and just stay with your take on the infrastructure conference, a lot of scepticism ahead of it. We were among the many pointing out Treasury says there's only 4 projects ready to go at the moment. One motorway's the chunkiest of them. But did they get a better kind of a result out of that in terms of engagement, in terms of being able to float the prospect of a second harbour crossing, in terms of at least one of the participants saying, hey, we're up for 5 projects in 5 years? Did it go better, Dale, than perhaps anticipated?
Well, look, it did invite some heavy hitters economically. You know, I question whether the driver for us needs to always be that economic benefit. I saw a quote attributed, I think it was to the Prime Minister, saying that by building the Waikato Expressway, people are working longer hours and getting home faster. Well, I don't know if that's the driver, and pushing forward into the north, it's really a holiday highway. There's nothing sort of too huge industry-wise up there that we need to link up unless we redevelop North Port. And so, there are people who want to invest in New Zealand. My question is whether we as a nation feel that is so important, shiny new things. Perhaps we should learn to make do with what we've got a little more. I mean, you can only wear one shirt at a time, can't we?
What is your take on the political significance of an appearance of momentum, given the fact that the Prime Minister in particular has hung so much on, his whole government has all year, so much on economic growth, the appearance of momentum while you're waiting for something that is bigger than anything you can do, which is an economy to claw its way out of a recession. Is that at least?
Yeah, so I mean, this government has been laying the seeds for what it says will, charge economic growth, and there are some things that certainly will. Fast track approvals, resource management reforms should do that as long as they're well executed. Various local government interventions and sort of tweaking around that kind of procurement. But look, that takes time. The only way that you can really sort of turn around everyday people's experience of the economy as a government, in sort of day to day, 1 week to 1 week, is to do helicopter money drops. And there are obviously, huge reasons not to do that in the current New Zealand fiscal situation, in terms of how much money the government has, in terms of not wanting to spark inflation. But what you do want to do is, set that narrative so that people think that, so people realise that you're putting that in place. But in the short term, slightly cynically, if the GDP figures come out on Thursday and we're in growth territory again, and God forbid if we're not, but if they are, you've heard this government saying growth, and you sort of think, maybe we are in good hands.
Except to Dale's point, it depends who you are, perhaps, whether you are, part of the frustration that's being speculated upon with the Prime Minister as having, promised to improve things economically. Dale, so many people just are not feeling it yet.
Oh, absolutely. Look, it's costing them, and you can see it in the polls. People are frustrated. We're not getting any traction. We've had this 1.5 years of stagnant economy, and so and they're
much longer.
That could be fair too, Ben. Yeah. But at the moment, when we reflect on the polls, a drop in personal support for the Prime Minister, a tempering in support across the parties now, and so neck and neck, we see if a election was held, then the left bloc a chance of getting up. They weren't in the months gone. So this drive towards some sort of economic boost has come at cost, because obviously we've flatlined, and as Catherine pointed out too, Ben, people are leaving in droves, frustration is building, and even the school lunch debacle has been very costly. So no, I can't think that they're getting traction here with the voting public, and a fairly lacklustre economic drive too is really hitting them where it hurts, and that's with public support.
And that investment summit, interesting, there was a bit of talk coming out of it that it was pretty well timed for a lot of the investors, in the sense that New South Wales, their big projects, a lot of them are coming to an end right now. So in terms of that sort of pipeline, which we hear about so much in terms of surety of projects and keeping capacity up, part of that will be able to switch to New Zealand if we can get these projects online, and we can hopefully bring back people to use their skills building things and earning money here rather than in the promised land.
The other matter that's happening here, we won't go into great detail, but it's going to impact the budget as well, is what is happening globally. This is kind of almost shock and awe stuff, really, in the last 2 weeks. The sudden large rearmament of Europe that is underway, and our own government talking about close to 2%. We know that's billions of dollars a year more in defence spending. But such delicate times for a Prime Minister also been to be, on the phone call with the coalition of the willing, those nations endeavouring to talk about some kind of a security force were it to be possible in Ukraine. Now, that's a test for any Prime Minister, let alone one who's had very little experience in the political and foreign affairs arena.
Absolutely. And I think, you see some ill-informed criticism of this government as sort of the New Zealand equivalent of the Trump administration or something in the United States. And on the foreign stage, that's where you see the real difference, which is that we are still a small country that believes in a rules-based order, and we, as the Prime Minister has said, we share the same values as Ukraine, primarily the value of not being invaded by larger expansionist neighbours. And that's a pretty fundamental baseline. And look, we have to be this is a sort of microcosm of where, of our role going forward, which is that we are not going to be the main strike force or the main peacekeeping force in any kind of operation. We have to be able to work in with our traditional allies and kind of encourage that sort of rules-based order. And we have to be able to play our part. It's a stretch right now, given the investment in our defence force, but we have to be there and be playing a part and be seen to be playing a part because the rules-based order is so important to us.
The rules-based order and the coalition of the willing, it almost sounds like catchphrases from an advertising agency. Well, no, Ben, what about the idea of some sort of neutrality? How does that sit with you? We haven't really investigated how that could be a possibility going forward. But look at us here, deep in the Pacific, with a reputation that is strong globally for principled stands, and yet we don't seem to, as a nation, want to consider this, it seems, as extremist, somebody who suggests that we might follow something like the Swiss model, who have defence capabilities there. We could have some drone efforts, because obviously we haven't got the money to buy big warships. But what do you think right-wing or right-leaning political parties, what's the hesitation to at least having a discussion about the potential for New Zealand, Aotearoa here to be somewhat neutral in these international affairs?
I mean, I would have thought that as a country with New Zealand's size and military power, we don't really have an option. We talk about New Zealand's independent foreign policy a lot, but ultimately we're only as independent as great powers will let us be.
We're what, others lackeys, you mean?
Well, I certainly think it would be, not others lackeys, but I mean, our place in the world is very much determined by what the great powers do. We're a trading nation, but we can't trade if everybody puts up barriers and tariffs.
Well, there's only one doing that at the moment. China's not waking them up, it's just the States.
We're a peaceful, non-aggressive nation. But
yes, that's what I mean, exactly.
So was the Ukraine before its invasion. I mean, we don't actually get a choice in terms of, we don't have full control over our international destiny, and no small country ever has.
Do you think that people want us? They want to invade us?
Not right now.
All right. Either way, billions. I take your point, Dale, and it will be interesting to see what the position of various parties of the centre-left are as this conversation continues, and particularly the increased spending on GDP, which appears to be being slated in. Let's pick up on, let's just stick with those polls for a moment, because one thing I did notice, Dale, for the first time, is that the share of the two biggest parties together has grown. One had been sort of languishing in the 20s and the other up mid-late 30s or whatever. They're both sitting around the mid-30s currently, and there has been something of a dip, a little of a dip in the share of the smaller parties, which has been extraordinarily high during this electoral cycle. Your thoughts on that, Dale?
Well, Chris Hipkins, and I was critical off the back of the election that he wasn't charging in and having a bit more of a go, but as I've recognised his political experience, he's just kept his gunpowder dry somewhat. And this steady hand has seen a growth in popularity. He's not prone to extremism and is quite sort of reserved in his commentary as well. I think that's reflecting well. Obviously, people are concerned with what's happening economically. the exodus out of New Zealand, the 22,000 people more that we seemingly have on job seeker benefits today than we did a year ago. It's playing into the hands of a coalition that Labour might spearhead. But for the minor parties, well, from a Maori perspective, I guess sitting at high fours to Party Maori is encouraging, and 10s for ACT and the Greens. It's a very intriguing poll or public reaction that we're witnessing at the moment. But I think from Labour's perspective and Hipkins, it's steady as she goes, and they'll be pretty upbeat about the chances of getting the reins of power in 18 months.
Yeah, a bit of a slide for New Zealand First in this. And again, this is kind of the point I'm making. Typically between elections under MMP, we have seen those smaller parties all fall down or around to the 5% mark. And this was before Te Pāti Māori really was really getting up and above the 5% threshold at all. It was often around 1-2%. So what we're seeing, Ben, is a little bit of a return to the two biggest parties hogging, but still pretty healthy numbers for those smaller parties.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a reflection of what we're seeing across Western democracies, which is that people are frustrated by the status quo. People want change faster. They want... as you probably see in the electorate in the United States, they want something that's more extreme, even if they can't describe what it is and might be slightly appalled when they see it. And, totally speculative, perhaps that's part of what's happening. Perhaps, I always sort of think as a moderate centrist myself, people will miss boring centrist parties when they're gone. And, maybe people are missing them in advance right now when they sort of see the international situation. The other thing is that some of the issues that ACT, New Zealand First, the Greens, Te Pāti Māori have used to really stay in the conversation, stay relevant, they are all less important to voters than the economy, but they may be falling in importance even more. Say you get past Waitangi Day, you get past the public submissions on the Treaty Principles Bill, ACT aren't as much in people's minds. There's only so many steps you can try and drive up or whatever. ACT will probably be in people's minds because of the school lunches, but it's not necessarily a good thing. And Te Pāti Māori, people might be thinking, well, actually, I'm just tired of this. I don't...
Yeah, it's an interesting point as to whether we will for a time see them retreat a little. The poll's not terribly consistent, the last two that were out. With respect to some of these parties, ACT down significantly in one, 7.7%, holding at 10 in the other, I think.
Don't mess with the kids' lunches,
Well,
Catherine.
that's what I want to say.
The kids are our taonga, they're our treasure. We should be feeding them the best possible kai we can get into their gullets as a nation, because they're our future. And to try and feed them $3 worth of stodge each day and expect them to go for it. Hey, they spend $8 on prison meals a day, and we're trying to get $3 lunches for our kids. I'm going to go out in a moment and see if I can land one in Auckland. What do you reckon I'll get for $3, Ben?
Probably a mince pie somewhere. But the interesting thing is now, this is where a story can... I appreciate what you're saying, the substance of the story, and I know there's a lot of communities really upset, Dale. I don't want to underplay it. But for the sort of general populace, now they're hearing that pies and lunches are being brought in from Australia, for goodness sake, to try and patch a gap. And it's how a story can become an unexpected pain point, including for the Prime Minister, whose policy it wasn't in the first place. But sort of left alone he was mid-last week, Ben, trying to defend this in the House.
Yeah, and look, it's an example... I mean... Partially, it's an example of, the law of big numbers. Hundreds of thousands of lunches, you're going to get mishaps. And we're in a space now where every one of those is going to go to the media and every one of those is going to be a political headache. I thought David Seymour was excellent on Q&A yesterday. I think it's one of the rare examples we see where a long-form interview actually really suits a minister putting their case. And he was talking about, 97, 98% sort of delivery on time, without mishap. Hopefully the injury rate is even lower than that. But
and there's less butter chicken in a row.
Yeah. And I think before the unfortunately termed exploding lunches, it was very very sad that happened. I think before that the tide really was sort of turning because the criticism was starting to get kind of crazy. People were saying, "Oh, pita pit, how can we expect kids to eat that? Wattie's frozen meals, how could we serve children that? Pies, lordy." And these are things that people eat. These are not things. This is not some kind of punishment. Anecdotally, I've heard attendance went up on Pi Day at schools. These are I think the expectations were sort of set very much either in Kandala or Grey Lynn about what exactly kids eat for lunch.
Well, actually, it's the regions being most impacted, and this is where there's a slight hint, I think, even from the Minister himself. One proposal is use the mass delivery in urban areas like Auckland, but don't be, thinking that that's going to work in small, far-flung districts.
Just admit you got it wrong, David. Just admit it and get on with it. Go back to what we had before. Save the $100 million. Try and make it up somewhere else. Don't cut the kids' quality of Kai. The school lunch program is a dog's breakfast.
Foreign Minister's going to Washington, D.C., and we were just commenting before we came on air, Ben, whether I was sort of hearing that word about town is that our diplomats are struggling to get a foot in the door anywhere. Your comment was, do you necessarily want to at the moment? How important this trip by Winston Peters?
Yeah, look, pretty important. I think my old colleague Matthew Hooden wrote in the Herald on Friday, if Winston Peters was put in politics for anything over his long career, it was this. It was to be able to go to the United States and put New Zealand's case to another nationalist leader, another charismatic nationalist leader.
He's meeting Secretary of State Marco Rubio.
Yep. Right now, as far as we know from all the reports, Donald Trump's assessment of New Zealand is that's where Bob Charles is from, a great country, and I don't know if we necessarily want to go on a much higher level than that. But, there is a lot of risk to New Zealand in the sort of trade war that's developing and in terms of our exports. So if Peters can hold the line, and I think he is the best qualified person in the country to be able to do so, that will be a great result.
Your thoughts, Dale?
Yeah, Winston's really experienced in this space too, and it's about time Trump had somebody whose hair might contend with his for the sharpest looking 80-year-old guy's hair routine. No, but in a more serious vein, it's not his first rodeo, as he likes to tell us, and it's going to be interesting to see what sorts of ongoing beneficial relationships can be either maintained or established by Winston's sojourn to the good old US of A. Interesting stuff, isn't it?
I think was it Thomas Manch who pointed out on RNZ that there'll be an officials briefing for Marco Rubio before the meeting, and chief amongst Winston Peters' recent activity will be his anti-DEI bill, and so look, maybe there is a method to all of the madness.
One hopes so in 2025 so far. Thanks very much, Ben Thomas and Dale Husband. It's bang on 11:30. Ngā mihi nui, Dale.